My name is Renee Callahan, and I learned the hard way that silence can be mistaken for weakness. For years, I let my family talk over me, the same people I once would have done anything to protect. My brother liked to remind everyone that Renee peaked a long time ago. He'd say it with that easy laugh of his, the kind that made cruelty sound like charm. I laughed too, because that was safer than showing how much it hurt. I told myself it was better to keep the peace, to let them believe whatever made their lives easier. But the truth is, every time I stayed quiet, a little part of me disappeared. That night, something in me broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just cleanly, like glass under pressure. I realized I had spent half my life being the shield for people who never once thought to cover me. So when his next invitation arrived, another celebration of his success, I didn't ignore it. I folded it carefully, slipped it into my coat, and said to myself, it's time they remember who I really am, even if it shatters everything they built on my silence. For 7 years, I had lived alone in that small house tucked between the pines of Colorado Springs. Nothing remarkable about it, just the scent of dry wood, the hush of wind against the siding, and the distant hum of training jets slicing the morning sky. Every time one passed overhead, my chest tightened. The sound was both familiar and forbidden, a reminder of what I'd walked away from and what would never call me back. That night, while polishing an old silver medal that no longer meant much to anyone but me, I noticed a thick envelope lying against the front door. The print was heavy, official, self-important. Nicholas Callahan, Veteran Entrepreneur Award, Denver Veterans Club. Below it, in smaller letters, family representation expected. I turned it over in my hands 3 times, unable to decide whether it was arrogance or guilt that made him send it. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not since I refused to approve one of his new defense contracts, one I knew carried flaws no amount of spin could hide. Maybe he wanted to parade the idea of a family with a legacy of service. It sounded good in interviews, when he called me the sister who used to serve. He liked the story more than the person behind it. I set the invitation down, meaning to throw it away, but my eyes caught on the uniform hanging inside the wardrobe. The fabric had faded, the shoulder seams were worn thin. The third button wasn't regulation issue. It came from a friend who never made it home. I hadn't worn it in years, maybe because I thought I hadn't earned the right, but standing there under the yellow kitchen light, I felt something shift. It wasn't pride, not exactly, more like defiance stitched quietly into memory. I folded the invitation and slipped it into my coat pocket. Tomorrow, I'd drive to Denver. Not for him, not for anyone, just to remind myself I still could. The reception hall shimmered with too much light, the kind that made everything look expensive, but nothing feel real. I stepped out of the elevator and into a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns, where people who'd never worn a uniform pinned shiny veteran supporter badges to their lapels like fashion statements. The air smelled of champagne and money. Across the room, Nicholas spotted me. His smile flickered for a moment, polite, practiced, before he leaned toward the men around him. Whatever he said made them laugh, the kind of laugh that cuts without drawing blood. A young waiter approached, his expression confused. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said carefully. "Are you with security tonight?" I held his gaze. "No, I'm just a guest." He flushed, stammered something, and backed away. But Nicholas had seen it. He raised his glass and announced to the crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My sister, everyone, she still fits that old uniform." The laughter rolled through the room, echoing off glass and marble. I didn't move. I didn't give them what they wanted. At the far end of the table, my mother adjusted her silk scarf, pretending she hadn't heard. She never did like anything that reminded her of service or sacrifice. It made her think of our father, and the day they brought home the folded flag. Nicholas approached, voice lowered but still edged with arrogance. "Renee, maybe you could change into something more appropriate. We have sponsors here tonight." I didn't look at him. "This is appropriate. It's mine." "How?" he sighed, half laughing. "That uniform's a little outdated, don't you think?" "Maybe for you," I said, and walked away. I found a spot by the window, away from the cameras. Below, Denver pulsed with color, streets glowing, towers lit in patriotic red and blue. From up here, the city looked clean, untouchable. Inside, everything reeked of performance. Nicholas's voice filled the hall as he accepted his award. "This recognition isn't just for me," he said, smiling toward the crowd. "It's for the people who inspired me, especially my sister, who once served our country with pride." Applause thundered. My fingers tightened around my glass. He didn't mean it. Every deal he'd signed, every dollar he'd made, had been built on credibility borrowed from my name, on the badge I'd once worn, and the silence I'd kept. For a moment, the crystal lights blurred, and the past pressed itself against the present. Smoke. Alarms. The smell of burning metal. The radio crackling system failure. The radar had glitched mid-flight. The report had traced the fault to the prototype equipment, Nicholas's prototype. I had said nothing. 10 years of silence. 10 years of letting him build an empire on the ashes of what I'd buried, and now, watching him lift that golden trophy beneath the flag. I couldn't tell what stung worse, the hypocrisy or the memory that I'd helped him make it possible. Rain had already started when I reached home. The porch light flickered as I shut the door behind me. I unpinned the medal from my chest and set it on the table beside a framed photo of my old flight team. In the picture, we were all impossibly young, bright eyes, easy smiles, unaware that half of us would never grow old. From the drawer, I pulled out an envelope yellowed by time. The handwriting across it read, "To the board. U.S. Air Force." Inside was the confession I'd written but never mailed, acknowledgement of the radar failure, admission of command responsibility, and one deliberate omission, the supplier's name. I'd written it to protect my brother. I'd almost sent it once. But Bartlett had stopped me. Sometimes silence saves more than words ever could. He'd said, I believed him. I thought silence could shield the innocent. I hadn't understood that it could also shelter the guilty. I slid the letter back into the drawer, but didn't turn the key this time. The lock no longer felt like safety. It felt like complicity. Outside, rain whispered against the glass, steady and cold. Somewhere between the rhythm of it and the echo of Nicholas's laugh, I realized the past hadn't ended. It had only been waiting, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to meet it. The night was almost over when the applause began to sound hollow, like a looped recording that wouldn't stop. I sat alone near the back, surrounded by gold light and noise that didn't reach me. The ballroom gleamed with the same false warmth as every other celebration Nicholas had ever hosted. Bright, perfect, soulless. He stood on stage, framed by banners and champagne flutes, holding a trophy high in one hand like it was proof he'd earned everything on his own. He talked about courage, about leadership, about sacrifice. Each word slid smoothly off his tongue, practiced and polished. The crowd cheered. I looked down at my shoes, scuffed at the tips, and thought about how easy it was to polish metal, but not memory. Nicholas raised his glass again, smiling that easy smile. This award, he said, was for those who dared to move forward instead of staying in the past. The room laughed politely. A few people glanced at me, and my mother, sitting at the table nearest the stage, joined in the applause a second too late. She couldn't even meet my eyes. He wasn't just mocking me. He was rewriting me. I could feel the weight of it, the years he'd spent building a story out of my silence. I stood, meaning to leave before I did something I'd regret. But the MC's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise guest tonight, someone who has served this country with distinction." The crowd turned toward the doors just as they opened. A group of officers walked in, uniforms crisp under the lights, medals gleaming. At the front of them was General Bartlett. Everything stilled. Even Nicholas stopped smiling. Bartlett had aged, but his presence hadn't dimmed. His eyes swept across the crowd until they landed on me. He paused. Then his voice filled the room, calm, sharp, impossible to ignore. "Major Callahan, why aren't you at headquarters today?" My breath caught. The sound of my old rank ricocheted through the hall, slicing through the polite air. Nicholas's expression faltered. He turned to our mother, whispering something I couldn't hear. Bartlett moved closer, hand extended. It's been too long. Major. I forced a small nod. Yes, sir. Much too long. People whispered, cameras flashed, the entire hall shifting toward me like a wave. Bartlett's eyes told me what his words did not. Headquarters wasn't a place. It was unfinished business. When I finally slipped outside, he followed. The city lights reflected off his metals, dull gold against his dark coat. You didn't answer my question, he said quietly. Why aren't you at headquarters? Because I thought I'd done enough damage. I said. He studied me. You didn't cause the damage. Renee, you contained it. And now it's time to finish what you started. He pulled a small envelope from his coat, sealed with a military crest. Confidential, from the board. I didn't take it at first. When I did, the edges cut into my fingers. I'm not military anymore. I said. Bartlett's reply was simple. Honor doesn't expire. Then he walked away. On the drive home, rain slicked the highway into a mirror. Halfway through the mountains, my phone buzzed. You shouldn't have talked to him. Keep your mouth shut. No name, no hesitation. At my desk, the envelope lay beside another. My unsent confession to the Air Force from 10 years ago. 2 choices, past and present, staring at each other. I opened the new one. Inside was an official summons. Request for immediate advisory return. Investigation into defense contract violations. At the bottom, one line stood alone. Primary supplier. Callahan Defense Systems. The room tilted around me. Headquarters wasn't calling me back to serve the country. It was calling me to face my brother and the truth I'd buried to protect him. Sleep never came that night. The streetlight outside flickered through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of dim gold and shadow. On the table in front of me lay 2 envelopes, one from Bartlett, one from the past, both waiting to be opened, both heavy in their own way. I pulled the old file from the drawer, the draft of the report I'd hidden for years. The ink had faded, but the words still hit like a blow. Radar system malfunction during flight test, pilot fatalities confirmed. Under the cause, a neat line typed long ago. Hardware inconsistency. Investigation suspended. I knew exactly what that meant. Hardware inconsistency was the polite term for faulty equipment, and that equipment came from Nicholas's company, back when it was little more than a family gamble with a borrowed name. On the desk lay a magazine clipping, Nicholas's face staring back at me, smiling beneath the headline, Nicholas Callahan, the face of innovation and patriotism. My stomach turned. When I was forced to resign, he used my downfall as a stepping stone. My sister sacrificed her career for duty, he'd said on television. The story made him respectable. My silence made him rich. I closed my eyes. 10 years of quiet had calcified into guilt. Each year I'd convinced myself I'd done the right thing, protecting family, keeping peace, but the lie had begun to rot from the inside. I reached for the small iron key and unlocked the floor safe. Inside was the old external hard drive. Dust settled like a layer of memory. I had never plugged it in since the day of the accident, but if Bartlett was right, if the investigation had reopened, this might be the proof they needed. The drive whirred to life, screen flickering blue, lines of data scrolled past, each one a ghost of that day. Then, from outside, the crunch of gravel, a car door. Headlights swept across my window and lingered for 3 slow seconds before moving on. I froze, every instinct sharp again. That familiar tension, the one I hadn't felt since deployment, tightened in my chest. I saved the files to a flash drive, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and shut down the system. If they came for me, I wouldn't be empty-handed. 2 days later, Nicholas called. His voice was stripped of all charm. We need to talk, he said. We met at a quiet restaurant on the edge of town, the same one where our father used to bring us for Thanksgiving. Now, it felt hollow, a museum of something long dead. The room smelled faintly of wine and polished wood. He was already seated when I arrived. His reflection fractured in the table's shine. He didn't bother with greetings. Bartlett contacted you, didn't he? I stayed silent. He poured himself a drink. They're reopening the case. Renee. You can stop it. Just say you destroyed everything. I met his eyes. I didn't destroy anything. Then you're about to destroy me. I leaned back, the weight of a decade between us. No, Nicholas. You destroyed yourself 10 years ago. I just stopped cleaning up after you." He laughed once, sharp and bitter. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a relic in an old uniform." "Maybe. But that old uniform built the company you're standing on." His smile vanished. The silence stretched until it felt solid. Then he leaned forward, voice low, almost trembling. "You talk, and I'll make sure they find something on you, too. You signed those test reports. Remember?" I didn't blink. "Yes. Because you begged me to." For the first time in years, I saw him hesitate. Not anger, fear. The kind that comes when a lie begins to crumble under its own weight. I stood. "I'm not your cover anymore." "Nicholas?" He rose halfway from his seat. "You'll regret this." I turned at the door. "No. I've been regretting for 10 years. I'm done now." Outside, the night air hit cold and clean. I drove home through the pines, headlights sweeping across the dark road. At the end of my driveway, a black SUV sat idling. When I slowed, it pulled away, disappearing into the trees. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, but my heart didn't race. If he was scared enough to send someone, then the truth was already moving. Too big, too fast, too close to bury again. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel trapped by silence. I felt armed by it. Winter in Washington had a bite that cut straight through the skin. The walls of the Pentagon shone white and sterile, the kind of clean that made the truth look out of place. Bartlett handed me a clearance card and said quietly, "You'll sit to my right. Don't justify, just answer." The hearing room was packed. 3 officials sat ahead. Cameras blinked from the corners. Nicholas waited across from me. Flawless suit, stiff smile. The practiced calm of a man who knew panic was useless. I didn't see my brother anymore, just someone hiding behind a company name. The prosecutor began. "We are reopening the 2012 radar test malfunction. Major Callahan, you are to testify under oath." I nodded once. "Yes, sir." They played the recovered data. On the screen, calibration failure, Callahan Defense Systems, unauthorized component replacement. The room froze. Nicholas's face drained of color. Bartlett rose. "Major Callahan took responsibility 10 years ago to protect this country and her family. The fault was never hers." Nicholas stood, shouting denial, but Bartlett cut him off. "Sit down, Mr. Callahan. Show some respect." When it ended, Bartlett touched my shoulder. "You did the right thing." "No," I said. "I just stopped doing the wrong one." Outside, snow fell, silent, cleansing, absolute. The headlines spread faster than I expected. Callahan Defense Systems under federal investigation. My brother vanished from every screen within 24 hours, leaving behind only silence and a trail of ruined contracts. My mother called again and again, her voice breaking in every voicemail I refused to answer. Then one final text came through. "He's lost everything. Please, come home." But home wasn't a place I could return to, not anymore. Instead, I drove to the cemetery outside Colorado Springs, where the ground was frozen and quiet. Snow had settled over the headstones like a shroud. My father's name was half buried beneath the frost. I brushed it clean and laid my old medal at the base of the stone. The metal hit softly, a small sound swallowed by the wind. I sat there for a while, hands numb, and whispered, "Dad." I finally stopped protecting the wrong person. When I returned, Bartlett was waiting on my porch, his posture still impossibly straight despite the years. He handed me an envelope labeled Reinstatement Offer, Advisory Board. I shook my head. "No, sir. I don't need the title. I just need them to stop using our name for profit." He studied me, then nodded. "Then that's your command, Major." We stood there in the cold, no words left between us, but in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't in a very long time, respect, and that, I realized, was enough. A year later, life had grown quiet again. I moved to a small white house near the old Air Force Academy, close enough to hear the faint hum of planes overhead. The birch tree in the yard had started to bend slightly with age, but it stood steady, like it had learned to weather the wind. I taught a course called Ethics in Service for New Cadets, young, sharp, full of conviction they didn't yet understand. That morning, one of them, a girl named Kelly, walked in holding an old uniform folded in her arms. "Ma'am," she said, "this is all I've got." The others say it looks outdated. I smiled, smoothing the fabric between my hands. Outdated? That's what people call things they don't understand will last. I fixed the collar for her and met her eyes. Remember this, Kelly. Headquarters isn't a building. It's wherever you stand, as long as you stand with honor. She nodded, and in her gaze, I saw the same fire I once carried. Outside, wind whispered through the birch branches, carrying the scent of early snow. I looked toward the horizon, not waiting for anything, just making sure that, after everything, I was still standing tall,